Oh,
What?
hello.
Go ahead. Go for it.
Um, Hi. As some of you might have already seen in the description of the topics, we will be talking about Age of Sail naval rules. The topic came up because I ran a play-by-post game in that era, and that was the naval blockade of Port St. James. Um, James might be familiar with the setting. He was playing in the first Swansea game, and this game is basically the continuation of that one. So, for situation context, after the Battle of Dessalines, which the Republicans under James he- heroically won, they now faced a supply issue. They captured the port, um, and the Republicans needed to bring supplies to their army. The Royalists, who had some frigates in the area, needed to obviously stop that. So the army that came from the north can retake that port. So the big objective out of this is the transports. Whoever gets the transports is at the end is the winner. So I devised a map from the Liberty of Congress. They had this very nice map, which Swenson told me he would never gonna use because who could ever use such a map? So, for my purposes, it was perfect. The port was directly on the eastern side of the map, where you see the inlet between big rock formation on the north and the swampy marshland on the south. Um, the Republicans would come from the south and the Royalists from the north, same as where their army is coming from. And for the rule set, as you can see in the bottom right hand corner, I used the one that was created partly by you, as that is the default Age of Sail rule set in the IKS. And I already have played with you in a game that used that one, and it worked pretty well for that live game in the Anglo-Dutch War. So I had to make some adjustments for stuff that was not included, like transport ships. So what my expectation was for this game, basically, both sides run for the port and then duke it out at that point. They are both hindered by the wind direction, but that should be fine. That should be all good. Um, the Republicans had two bigger frigates to support their transport ships, and the Royalists had like five normal frigates. Um, both sides got a week to plan, completely different attitudes and approaches from both sides. That was interesting. Um, the biggest difficulty was later on the signaling, and that was not addressed by neither side in that phase. That is something I can give to anybody who wants to play Age of Sail and plans a battle there. Signaling is a big downfall in any game I've played so far in that setting.
So describe what the players had to do. What you mean by the signaling?
Um, in the rule set, there is a section. Let me. Uh, um, can you see the rules now?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yep.
Okay. So you have this section down here. You can give flag signals symbolized by numbers, and you can have a combination of 10 of these numbers, and that will give a message. That sounds great, and it's nearly real-time communication. It's the closest you will ever get in an IKS game to that normally. And but the problem is that those numbers have a certain meaning, and it's not every situation works with those signals that you get. Like, also, you have to interpret them. It's attack the transport is relatively clear. You have to attack the transport. But how are you doing that? Another thing that might be more interesting is general chase. That's something that doesn't really give us anything in today's wording. Um, for people of the era, that would be very clear. Yeah, every ship does their best to chase after the target, do their best speed, and do whatever they can. But other things like capture or any special signals that might be relevant for the scenario at hand are not included in this basic set. And it already says some numbers are spares that can be changed or are private signals. It encourages players to work on it and add to it. You have a lot of signals that are unoccupied that you can expand upon. Or you can even get a second set if you have a modifier signal for it. There are a lot of options. Let's get back to. But neither side really engaged in that. And you will see it shows later on.
Will you go tell Mom that I'll be there in like 15 minutes?
This opening was fairly standard. We saw some disorganization in the Republican side at that point. We very fast we see big disorientation on the Royalist side because the last ship went on a different course than everybody else. The Republicans, on the other hand, create a problem because their flagship, that is the one that's isolated in front of the rest, is slowly
Is it
moving
real?
northeast, while the rest is moving with the wind and is very fast heading northwest. Not so they are on a collision course. We and so now this actually caused a collision there, and now everybody is basically trying to align themselves more in direction to the port on the Republican side. The Royalists have the second ship sheer out of formation,
What?
and that will increase to a third ship. And at this point,
Is it free?
it's nearly
Here, get me a paper
as
towel. I
now.
gotta clean
Now
this
it's
or something.
8:30, so light conditions are getting better, and the both fleets are about to spot each other now. Um, and so they make way for each other. You see on the Royalist side, the formation is completely gone at this point. The Republicans get their formation back in some form. It's not what they planned. And we now get to the phase where some combat is happening up in the north with the two frigates that escort and the other frigates that of the Royalists. They mostly ignore that and head straight for the transport who make a run down south. They try to escape or at least get out of the way of most of the Royalist
I
frigates.
crashed it. It's dying.
That doesn't work. They all concentrate on those transports, but they do a valiant effort to reform a line and get out of dodge as best as they can. We now that's one thing we can go back to later again, but see that after a while, the first ship gets captured by the royalists. Um,
I crushed it, yeah.
they are now headed on an intercept course with the big frigates that are coming now down to try to help them. The royalists mostly overshoot. They're sailing too fast and often have only one slight pass at the transport, which hampers their efforts somewhat. And now we get to the final stages of the fight. The captured transport heads off away. The flagship of the Royalists still push on and keeps with the transport and engages them further. And the rest is hanging about and fighting whatever they can get in front of their guns. And this is now the end state. What you might have noticed that each of these squares is 1 kilometer. Though there was not a lot of movement in all that time that passed over the 6 hours of game time. Um, so this 6 hours of game time is basically they should have crossed this area of map in frigates several times. That's one of the points why I decided that the rule set that we had was not actually suitable for combat that's not ship of the line. And the other thing is, if you remember in your, there's a lot of modifiers depending on the size of the ships. Where is that one again? Um,
It's down below.
yeah,
That one.
there's
Oh,
yeah here
that's distance. Yeah, one down.
distance, but down here you have the first rank gets a +4 modifier. Third rank is a neutral, and from fourth rate down you get a -2 modifier per rate. Um, which makes hitting something very, very hard and only possible at close range combined with the modifiers for range.
Hmm. Yeah,
That's perf
yep, go ahead.
that's perfectly fine if you're dealing with ships of the line who can engage on long distances and have no negative modifier by themselves and can even then create more than one hit and have a good chance to create a critical hit. That works decently fine there. On smaller ships like frigates, it leads to a very drawn out engagement where nothing really happens. I had several turns where everybody shot at each other and nobody created a hit at medium ranges, sometimes in perfect position. That was the other point where I said, yeah, that rule set works good for big ships, but it's not really suitable for smaller ships. And yeah, for somebody who might be interested, that was how my screenshots looked to the players. They had a feeling of a microscope, um, with a radius that would be the distance of the horizon you can observe from the deck. Yeah, but here's a big thing. The other thing that was worked decently well in my game was that I made the players take a small test if they can, to see if they are dedicated to the system, if they did read about it first. So not first come, first serve, but first take the test. But that still needs some improvement. Also, the importance of flag sickness is something I would have to stress more in future games. And also remind the players that it's different in land battles. You have to plan ahead several turns where your ship would gonna move because stopping and turning on the dime is something you can do with an infantry regiment, but not with a ship. They don't work that well in that way. But to address the rules, I did a rework of the rule sets. It's from the how it works. It's very similar,
Hmm.
but there's two things that big have a big difference. I removed the big modifiers for the rate. I instead replaced it by the amount of dice.
Mm.
Like now, our first rate gets 3d20 with a +1 modifier because it's the bigger one. The correlation here is that the amount of d20s is equal to the amount of gun decks a ship has.
Oh,
So
interesting.
bigger ship, more d20s they can roll. Also, the damage, hull damage is increased. So now you have more dice that are rolled, so the damage potential is actually a little bit higher. So to compensate for that and to distinguish staying power of the different rates, I have a not very complicated staggered hull damage system. The other big thing that is changed is how speed works. Um, for first and second rates, it's the same as in the other system, but beginning with the third rates, we have a slight difference. Third rates now get a little bit of a speed boost compared to first and second rates. Fourth rates, to indicate that they are really light ship of the lines, is but still ship of the lines. They now have a slightly more complicated movement formula, basically giving the double the speed of a first rate. Um, Slightly slower than the light frigates, like fifth and sixth rates, but nearly similar to unrated vessels like a brig or a schooner. Well, merchants they are really slow because they have a small amount of crew normally, um, because it's not profitable to have a big one, and they are heavily loaded every time they went to sea, and so they get a negative modifier and are now slower than our first rate. You can adjust that if you say, like, I have a clipper who's only shipping light cargo like tea, then you might want to remove that -1 or actually use an unrated vessel or even a six-rate movement stat. But that's something you would have to decide on case by case basis. The other big thing that I changed is that crew morale is now directly linked to hull damage.
Hmm.
Like every 10% of hull damage, you would reduce the crew morale by one step. And if you're at shaken, the last step to fleeing, that would be a morale test. It has a 50% to succeed. And then every turn after where the ship gets damaged, they would roll again to see if they are mentally strong enough to stay in the fight. I think I should stop now and let you ask questions.
I like all those changes. Well, I see we have Achilles and Miles listening in. If you would like to participate and ask questions as well, raise your hand and I can invite you to speak. In fact, I can just invite you um, if you have questions for Langbart. Um, so if you get an invite, go ahead and um, accept it if you'd like to speak. Let's see questions. So the new rule changes. You've not tried them out yet, right? These are after your last game.
Um, I have done two live games already with new rules
Oh,
or
okay.
the basic ones, and they worked decently well. Or actually pretty well. I added some more stuff I got from feedback in the action economy. For example, I added an option to raise crew morale again only when the ship is out of combat or try to make repairs. Also, only out of combat. There are more detailed rules further down in the rules. It takes several turns to repair something. You can't actually fire your guns at somebody. You basically be totally only doing that, and you have to be out of combat
Mm.
and fairly safe.
Um,
I ha
oh, go ahead.
I
I'm
hear.
sorry. I was going to ask you a question, but go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Given the, I mean, unfortunately, I kind of came in after the beginning, so, um, but I'm really interested. This fascinating stuff. Um, given the the complexity level that you're at with with the system, what is the scale you think you could go to? I mean, how big of a fight could you do with this and still manage it?
I went already to four ships as a single umpire,
Hmm.
with each ship, or at least most of them, have a player in them.
Hmm.
So that went decently well. I could conclude a game of two game hours in, I think it was 3 hours, a real time.
Hmm.
So that's decently fast and gives a good conclusion.
Hmm.
Um,
So you're not looking to try to do Trafalgar, right?
with enough umpires, you could technically do it with that,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
but
So it's
it's mostly a question if you have enough umpires who can share the screen with the players,
Yeah.
collect the orders.
it,
Um,
it's designed for each ship to be captained by a player.
Hmm.
And so if you have a player per ship and you have enough umpires where it's roughly probably one umpire per three players, you could theoretically do any size like a grand game.
Hmm.
Um,
But it looks like the Goldilocks zone here is probably squadron versus squadron, like four, three, four, five ships per side, maybe
yeah,
at max,
yeah,
something like
yes.
that. Yeah, that's what I
The
thought.
the big thing is the bigger the fight is,
Hmm.
the less enjoyable it will be for the players.
Right, right.
As you might have seen in James' last naval game about Cape St. Vincent, um, if you really play accurate to the time period, you form a line.
Right.
And players who are at the back of the line, they don't really have to do too much. So it kind of gets boring for them and they don't have too much choices
Hmm.
anymore.
Hmm.
yeah,
So at that point, you could reduce like one player per squadron, like 4 or 5 ships per player,
Hmm.
and those would then function as like one unit. And you would assume that they would communicate each other by flag, what they are doing, what the planned action is, and you would say the NPC captains can stay information, and you make the player the admiral or vice admiral or rear admiral, depending on which squadron he leads.
Hmm. It would really, I think it would work really well for those, like the American War of 1812,
Yes,
the frigate battles between U.S. frigates and British frigates, that kind of thing.
yes, that should work perfectly fine. you might want to make a small adjustment then in how you class those frigate. Maybe you give the Constitution like 5 hit points more, but
Mhm.
still, and maybe a +1 modifier for the guns because they had slightly bigger ones than the British frigates of the time.
Mhm.
And you should perfectly be able to recreate Guerrier's Constitution.
Excellent. All right. Thank you. That's all I was going to ask. So,
How, how does wind attitude impact movement?
That is the same as in the old rule set. Let me roll to it.
And
So,
I'm a sailor, so that's the important aspect of the game to me. Okay.
so you have this interesting table. So you can't go into the wind.
Yep.
Very basic. Uh, that is 45 degrees to either side of the wind direction. Then you have a close hold section that would give you a -1 modifier to your movement.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you go fighting sails, that's a normal of 2. So now you would only move 1, so 100 meters. Um, the big advantage you have if you're close hold is you can turn faster. Normally you can only turn up to 45 degrees. If you're close hold at the beginning of the turn, you can go up to 60 degrees in turn. Beam reach is similar. It still has a -1 modifier, but it doesn't help you with your turn anymore. Broad reach gives you a +1, and running is only the basic one. So broad reach you would now move 3 if you're fighting sail, and running you would only move 2.
And you've got different sail plans, so you could throw a whole bunch of. Like, I was surprised that transports didn't throw up a whole bunch of sail and scatter.
Um, you can have sail styles from no sail, of course,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
up to extra sail.
Got it.
So
Oh, that's good. I like that.
that's something I really liked from the original rule set. So I worked hard to keep it in there, because it is very intuitive and it works easily on the table. You can easily calculate that as an
Mm-hmm.
umpire. And with now doubling, that actually gives decent numbers for the speed for ship of the line.
Yep.
And we know that frigates basically move doubles the speed of ships of the line. So with a ×2 modifier, that should now work decently well,
Mm-hmm.
and give accurate results, more or less. Like, it's a model after all.
Yep. I know I've done a game of Trafalgar where we used signal flags, and it was it was very funny, but it didn't work very well.
But yeah, that's a big downfall in most of the games. You basically have to encourage every player to look at the flag signals beforehand and try to apply them. Because just looking at them and then going into the game, it doesn't really work most of the time.
Yeah, no, I
Some
think you have
players
to.
can do this, but at most can't.
I think your players have to have a conversation ahead of time so they all know what he means, because there's some pretty abstract terms in there that you put 4 random people together, you're going to get 4 random outcomes.
That the signals that are in this rule set, I changed mine slightly a bit to make it more easy on the players. Even more, they are already easy. I play in a game that's run by Titan, and he actually uses the original signal book of the British Navy. So
Yeah, that's what we used, and we had flags, and it was a lot of fun, but we didn't really communicate very
That
well.
makes it hard.
well, Miles, that happens with radios too. as somebody once said, all the radio did was make you get the wrong information faster.
Hmm.
Yes,
True.
that's a common occurrence that might happen. Yeah.
Well, I hope you run another game soon. I'd love to give it a shot.
I planned to run another live game to test another section of newly added rules at the very bottom. I thought about, like, here you see some basic other signets now in my rule set here. But what I am really trying to test now is the variation rules. Like, after the Capes and Vincents, there was a lot of critique from some players that British seamanship would have been way better than the Spanish at the time, and that is not represented. So I thought, how would I incorporate something like that in my rule set? So
British Napoleonic players always complain for advantages.
yes, they can, but now the umpire can actually give them that. If they can give them like one more action, or they give them a better morale standing. But that is the second one. I think is a better one. The one more action is if you really want to show that they are the top of the line, the best of the best, and compared to the other guys who are really the bottom of the barrel. That's something that the umpire now can play with. But if you have a highly motivated crew who are really, top-notch and have a lot of battle experience, then it might be reasonable to give them a high-spirited crew health. So they make a fleeing test at 50% of hull damage and not only at 40%.
Yeah. I think that's a reasonable compromise.
Yes.
As someone who always plays against the British, I don't want to give them too much.
Well, the other thing that I want to test now is how would an umpire put together an OBB if it's not based on a historical event?
Yep.
So I devised a point system, and you might see this. The point value is not really calculated by something. It's just increased. It's doubling until the third rate, and then it's just +8 both times.
Yep. There's a tabletop rule set called Fire as She Bears you might want to take a look at. I think you can buy a PDF version for a couple bucks. It's the one we play at the club all the time. It's actually pretty good, and it's got a lot of flavor and campaign things where you can try to run a fleet in a made-up campaign. That may give you some ideas.
Yeah, I'm familiar with this sort of thing. I'm just thinking if my point values are decent enough representation of what it actually worth on the table. Because if I take it from another rule set, that might work, it might not work. This is now easy to remember for now, and if I see that something really doesn't work, then I can readjust it. Also, some things shouldn't not fight each other ever. Like, if you fight a 6th rate against a 1st rate, you're predestined to lose. Even if you have way more 6th rates than the other player has 1st rates, you will lose because the 1st rate only needs to get one good shot into you, and you will be running for the hills.
It's like a game of ogre.
Yeah. So at that point, the question is, do you have enough ships to wear the 1st rate down? Or do you not? And since you only have one die to try to get a hit, and the 1st rate has 3 with a plus modifier to each one of those, the likelihood that they get hits is way higher, and they will get more critical hits than you.
Now, can you target rigging, or are you always shooting at the hull?
You can target rigging, same as in the old rule set. You have a slight negative modifier to it. Um, you
Yeah, there's a negative modifier to hitting it, but if you're close enough, you can also fire different types of shot, like chain
Yeah,
shot,
chain shot.
to give you
Yes.
better odds.
God, these look like a lot of fun. Really like to try them.
Sure. I will shoot you an invite to my servers, but it's maybe not a decent time for you, since I am European.
Well, I'm in London every 6 to 8 weeks, so
Well, what I love about it is, so I think CT Mac, who I don't see too often in IKS anymore, but he took the rules from far distant ships and made a rule set, and then Peter Robbins took that and made a rule set, and then I took that and I made a rule set, and then I wasn't happy with it, so I made the one that Langbart saw, and now Langbart's taken that and is making it better, and so it's on its like seventh iteration of getting improved. So I love it.
that's pretty funny.
Well, yeah. Yeah. The other, also, a die cannot cause more than one damage.
Oh,
That
interesting.
was. Yeah. Yeah.
So if it has 45 hull or 40 hull, it would take 40 hits from a ship or ships to fully sink it.
to fully sink it.
Yeah.
But that was not actually often how it played out in the naval battles of that era. Mostly the ships either surrendered or they fled. If they could, they fell out of the line and or went away. So now let's go for the first group because it's easy. Every 4 points of hull damage, the crew morale would go one lower. So at first, it would be in a normal game, it would be steady. That's how it starts. After 4 points of damage, it goes to disordered. At 8 point, it goes to rattled. At 12, it's shaken, and at 16, you make your first fleeing test. Surrendered is an option if you say the ship has no chance of getting away, or it's so badly damaged and the crew is so mangled already, they have no will to fight anymore, they don't even want to run anymore. There's if you lose all your masts, so you're completely dismasted, then you automatically get to shaken, even if you're perfectly fine hull-wise. And if they then take any damage, they also have to make the fleeing surrender test. But as they can't run away, they would automatically surrender. Yeah. If you're out of combat, you can again raise that crew morale again. It has some advantages to do that, and it symbolizes or should symbolizes reconstitution of the crew. Like we get, come on, guys, we got this. We can go back in there and take those, and gives the captain a chance to make a rousing speech. It is not guaranteed. It has a 50% fail chance, but at least they have the chance to do that.
Yeah, I like that.
Because I saw in my games that there is often an interlude between the actual fighting, and then they move past each other, they're circling around, and then there's like half an hour of nothing because they're just maneuvering back into position, and now they can at least get some morale back in that time.
That's one area where you could also maybe give the British an advantage by giving them a +1 on that roll, because they did have generally a much better officer corps.
That's something one can consider, of course. That's is a new thing that I recently added, so I have not tested that one. The same as hull repair. That's also still out to be tested.
All right. Well, I would stay up late for this game if you have another one. So
Well, yes, I will shoot you a link. Let me. Where is?
While you're working on that, Langbart, thank you for showing the after action report of your game and walking us through your new rules. Looking forward to seeing you do that. Um, any last comments before I end the recording?
Not from my side. Thank you for letting me speak here. Any more questions from anyone?
not for me. I enjoy the conversation. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it. It looks very interesting. I get to play in one.
Thank you guys for joining and participating.